welcome to episode 284 of the Daily Fantasy Edge. My name is Adam Levitan. I am one of the analysts here at DraftKings. I'm the father of the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry. And we are coming off of a godlike week with great vengeance and furious anger. Did Chris Godwin, the god himself, struck down the Rams 44 DraftKings points at 0.72% ownership. And for the first time in my life, I did not have Chris Godwin when he was starting an NFL game. Sad. You know, we got word on Saturday that Godwin would play. He'd tough it out through his hip issue. But still, I honestly did not expect Jameis Winston to play well in this spot. Did not think this was the right setup for Godwin at less than 100%. But, you know, I think that when people cite defense doesn't matter, the defense doesn't matter take, they can point to things like this. They can point to Nick Chubb unloading on the Ravens in Baltimore, Lenny Fournette careering it at Denver. It's not that defense doesn't matter. It's that projecting which defense will be good is extremely difficult, particularly in a one-game sample. So at the tails, like we can say Arizona's defense is atrocious. We can realistically say the Patriots defense and the Bears defense, those are elite units. But when we get into units like the Rams and the Ravens and the Broncos, well, we just really don't know. But anyways, back to Godwin, I didn't play any Bucks. I had a main cash team. I had 7 tournament teams. I had 4 p.m. only and no Bucks. And maybe that was a mistake, something I've been trying to concentrate on for tournaments and really for everything is not thinking about matchups on a micro level or at a defensive level, thinking about it in the context of how offenses interact. In other words, are these two offenses capable of making this game just go completely berserk, independent of everything else? And in the case of Tampa and the Rams, like how could you not say yes? When the Bucs offense is clicking and the talent that they have, when the Rams offense is clicking and the talent that they have, how could you say that these schemes and these offenses couldn't turn into some kind of shootout? So yeah, I just think it's something to keep in mind there. Other notes from week 4, I have to mention the Mark Ingram thing. I just don't understand. I believe I had Mark Ingram projected around 10% owned in the Millie Maker, and I was just straight shocked, dumbfounded to see that he was 23.8% owned at 6,600 against the Browns. And Wayne Gallman, 4,600. I mean, 2,000 less for Wayne Gallman. He was only 16% owned in the Millie Maker. I'm not trying to dunk on anyone or whatever, but Mark Ingram at that price with a limited pass down role, facing competition from Gus Edwards on a weekly basis. I mean, Mark Ingram just never even crossed my mind. And then on Gallman, for 2K less, Gallman, just a little research, I think would have led people to realize that he's actually been a really, really productive pass catcher at the NFL level. Has the job to himself, I thought, with Saquon Barkley down. And perhaps most importantly was in this game environment where his team projects to possess the ball a ton, be in the red zone a ton, quietly has a really good offensive line. So for 4,600, I don't know what to make of that ownership. What I would note, I guess, is that in the $333 Wildcat, the higher stakes tournament, Ingram was only 9% owned and Gallman was 20. So, I get when people say DFS is dead, the games are too tough. Maybe that's true at high stakes cash. Maybe it is outside of some rare exceptions. But in all tournaments, I think, and in lower / mid stakes cash, I really don't think that it's dead at all. Let's get to the 4-man. And for the second straight week, I thought I had it locked up. But then the listener, Talon Bray, played a Goff Cup Wood stack and just went absolutely ham. He finished with 209 points in the 4-man, which I believe was like a top 0.5 percentile score for any format in the whole week. Like he got 5th in the listener league after winning it in week 3 with that team. I mean, just absurd. As for my cash team, I think the real question was what you did at running back. If you got on Gallman, Eckler, Christian McCaffrey, like I did, you likely won. If you went in another direction, Marlon Mack or even Kerryon, who, Kerryon I really liked, and Kerryon didn't play poorly by any stretch, but if you didn't have Gallman, Eckler, McCaffrey, you were likely in trouble. One thing that I've done with success the last 2 weeks is pay down a quarterback, and this is nothing new. I mean, I always try to pay down a quarterback and defense, but quarterback, in week 3, Kyle Allen for 4K this week, Daniel Jones, 5,300, and then pay down at defense. In week 3, it was the Chargers against the Texans for 2,500. This week was the Panthers against the Texans for 2,500. It makes it easier and more reasonable to get on Eckler, Keenan, CMC, and I spent for Darren Waller. I was able to spend for Darren Waller too, and got off Will Dustley, which, didn't work out, but thought that was the right play at the time. By the way, I can't believe nobody told me about this Bible narrative. I mean, Russell Wilson and Will Dissly go to Bible study together. Nobody told me this. I swear I would have changed my mind on him. Anyways, lots more thoughts on that and cash and everything. You can go to DK Playbook, read the lineup review there. Let's move on to the Listener League. It did fail in week 4. It was 8K entries. I'm not sure how big it's going to be for week 5. It's filled 2 straight weeks. I don't know if they're going to make it bigger or not, but regardless, the way you get into it is you go to DK Playbook, find the logo for this podcast. The link is on that page. Not that hard. The winner of the week 4 Listener League was Kahuna11E. Just an outrageous 238.58 points. He would have won the power sweep, the $150 3 max. He would have won that by 15 points. He would have gotten 4th in the slant, the big $9. His lineup was Jared Goff, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, brought it back with Chris Godwin, of course. So he had Goff at 4.5%, which surprised me a little bit. Robert Woods, I knew would be low owned. He was in buy low model this week. And yeah, we know what Robert Woods' ability is. We saw how good he was last year. And then bring it back with Godwin. I already talked about Godwin, 0.7%. Kerryon Johnson, Wayne Gallman, and Uncle Lenny at his running back spots. And then he ate the chalk at tight end with Evan Ingram, who I really liked. Bears defense, just an absolute Yahtzee lineup. Unreal. Congrats to Kahuna 11. See you in the 4-man. In second place was Scout 326. He had Jameis Winston at 0.2%, and we talk all the time, and I try to talk about finding good players at low ownership. You don't have to play these total dust balls to get low ownership. Jameis 0.2%, Mike Evans 1.1%, Godwin under 1%, and then brought it back with Cooks and Kupp. So 5 guys from that Rams Bucks game, Eckler and Gallman, the chalk at running back, and then he used Hawkinson to save at tight end, which I really liked. Expected the Lions to play well, expected the Lions to score points, and in those kind of shootout situations, I think Hawkinson makes sense. Unfortunately, he took that scary hit, and he's hurt now. In third place was Hornets fan. Again, Goff, Cooks, Woods. Did not have Kupp, but, this was kind of an ownership leverage play you could have made. You knew that Cooper Kupp was going to be the most owned out of the 3, and so he played Goff with Cooks and Woods. I like the thinking there. Godwin and OJ Howard, Devontae Freeman, Texans defense. So a super contrarian lineup that ended up working out for Hornets fan. Congrats on the 3rd place finish. Got a note from the 4th place finisher, Maury15, said he's a longtime fan. Appreciate you, Maury515. He played Chubb and Nick Chubb and Giants defense at really low ownership on both, and that was a big difference maker. Congrats. Nice team, Maury515. Thanks for being a fan. My best tournament team, I had 7 tournament lineups on the main slate this week. My best team wasn't great. I think it was like 5th percentile or something like that. And these ownership percentages are from the 150 power sweep that I already alluded to. I played Lamar Jackson at 7.6% owned, and I think that's really good. I mean, I thought Lamar Jackson easily had a chance to be the best quarterback on the slate and one of the highest floors on the slate. So a really good floor ceiling combo for 7% on Lamar Jackson. The regret, I guess, from a tournament perspective, from a large field tournament perspective, was pairing him with Marquise Brown. I think Marquise Brown at 17.7% owned. That's really high ownership for a guy who has a really low floor. And yeah, Marquise Brown's going to have a ton of air yards all year. Capitalizing on those air yards is going to be difficult on a week-to-week basis because his ADOT is going to be high and because Lamar is still progressing as a thrower. So at 17%, I'd rather play Marquise Brown when he's much lower owned. I brought it back with Jarvis Landry. And so Jarvis Landry was only 1.2%. Jarvis Landry was a guy that was in the buy low model, had been seeing plenty of opportunity and not capitalizing. And I just think that Jarvis Landry is an underrated player in general. We know he has a reasonable floor based on the way he runs routes. And I'm completely not sold on this Baltimore secondary and thought Baker Mayfield could play much, much better than he played. Liked Odell Beckham, just thought it'd be more contrarian here and save me a ton of money to go Lamar, Marquise Brown, Jarvis Landry. Also played Eckler and Gallman in this lineup. Travis Kelce, I wanted to be on. He was 15%, which, Travis Kelce is always going to be in that range no matter how poorly he's played. Tried to get weird at wide receiver with Calvin Ridley. Still think that was a good play at 3%. Obviously, it was a major struggle for Matt Ryan and the Falcons against the Titans. And then, Christian Kirk, I played at 18%, and that's probably pretty bad to play Christian Kirk at that ownership percentage just because, I've been lower than market, I think, all year on Cardinals offense, and Christian Kirk's route tree and the way Kyler Murray is throwing is just not conducive to huge games. You would need him to get like 10, 12 targets for him to rip off a really big game, but still thought he was fine at 5,100. Just wish he was a little bit less owned. So the average cumulative ownership in that lineup was around 15%, which I think is fine. Maybe a little bit high, but I think it's fine. All right. Get into the listener league this week. Fill it. Hashtag make it bigger. Now it is time for some listener questions. Producer Luke, hit the theme music. All right, question 1 comes from D'Artagnan. He says, a common line I hear is someone says, I'm going to have some exposure to that player. And so a pro says it, he says. Is this 1% of 250 lineups? Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, D'Artagnan. It's a pathetic thing to say. I agree with you. I'll probably offend some alleged pros by saying that. But yeah, a real pro, I think, will be playing high stakes cash on every slate. And then likely some tight cores, some take some really strong positions in their GPP stuff. People just spewing 150 lineups into small stakes GPPs. I'm guessing most of them, not all, but I'm guessing most of them have too many guys in their player pool. I'm guessing they're not thinking too hard. A lot of them have really tight decisions. Like a lot of people are like, well, I can't decide if I want to play Leonard Fournette or not. So yeah, I'll do 5% on him. Cool. And then when he goes off, I can say that I had him. So yeah, I agree with you, D'Artagnan. I cringe when people use that line too, that I'm going to have some exposure to that player. I'd also be careful about how you're defining the word pro. But yeah, all that said, I know I'm too hard on the small stakes, large field GPP guys. I'm trying to be nicer and more open-minded. I didn't do a good job there, but I'm trying to be nicer and more open-minded. Question 2 comes from Stephen Dell Hudson. He says, how is the house hunt going? Yeah, thanks for asking, Stephen. I mean, it's tough. I'm sure a lot of you guys have gone through it. I mean, I feel like it's a pretty big decision considering our situation. I don't really think that it's right to settle down somewhere, to let the kids make friends, to develop a life, and then ask them to move. That's tough, I think. So given that our youngest is 1, well, wherever we move next is where we'll likely be for the next 18 years, right? And that's a long time. Hell, for all we know, that could be the rest of my existence on this planet. Might not make it 18 years. So, and then on top of all that, I think where the kids grow up shapes a lot about them. So I want that to be right. And if we're being honest, like I've spent my entire life on the East Coast, grew up in Virginia, went to Penn State, been living in Philadelphia for the last 15 years. I do think from a weather perspective, and by the way, I do think weathers and people's mood and kind of the overall atmosphere of a place, I do think weather makes a big difference. So from a weather perspective, from an affordability perspective, from just like a general culture of the region, the East Coast maybe isn't the optimal choice, but I really don't know. I've never really lived anywhere else for a long period of time. I did see some houses in the Denver suburbs last time we were there. My wife's sister actually lives there, and it's really incredible, man. Like, I'm not even sure people out there would consider Denver cheap, but it's like half as much, or like, I don't know, a quarter cheaper than the Philadelphia suburbs. There's just so much more land out there. And it's insanely beautiful, access to like true team smell the roses activities out there in the mountains and outside. But, it's tough to leave behind family and friends and what especially, when you have two little kids. So it's tough, man. And, I didn't even get into my mental problems. I mean, really, if we can do it, I'd really want a new house, just tired of living in the previous owner's filth, what someone else thought was the best house or the best layout for a house. Everything in my current house is breaking. The previous owner just stuck us with things at the end of their line, hot water heater and air conditioner and roof and all that, things are falling apart, and that's just what happens. So I do think that if possible, a new house is best. There's just not that much space in the Philadelphia region for new houses, and it's very, very, very expensive. So I don't know. Sorry to ramble. Hopefully soon we'll find something. Every time I see this goddamn mouse that my kid calls George, it's a reminder that we got to get the hell out of here. Question 3 comes from Schmalk305. He says, can a real man put showdown lineups in from his phone? Yeah, I was just joking, of course, about tossing in, lineups from your phone. Of course, it can be fun. It's whatever. It's easy. If you're really trying to win, though, I think we're always going to want to do it on desktop, so we have more information in front of us. We see the full layout of options. We can click through games. And while I do think Showdown is really thin and probably not a great game for cash, and, some random combination you come up with maybe has a chance, although I'm not sure. I definitely think there's a lot of skill in Showdown GPPs, like a ton of it is understanding ownership leverage in a one game slate and the ability to project game flow and how lineups should look according to that flow for correlations. Like there's a ton of skill in that. So it's actually really interesting, and DraftKings format is really cool with the captain spot costing more money. So yeah, I've been putting more thought into it. We're working on it a lot, and I don't know. I find it. I guess I find it more interesting now than I did on first glance. Is what I'm saying, and I think there's a lot more thought to it than just trying to get lucky by throwing some stuff in on your phone. Question 4 comes from Jesse Martin. He says, "How do you manage extra lineups, quote unquote? For example, if the bulk of your money is on DK Cash, when and how do you make time on Sunday mornings for other lineups, especially as the season goes on with more and more relevant news?" Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly distracting to the main lineup to play other stuff. It really is. I think that I've gotten better at just letting the chips fall where they may. In other words, these final 2v2s for the main lineup, they're so close that I have to just go with one side and live with it. It's really, the bottom line is it's important that I at least force myself to play the mini slates, the 1 p.m., 4 p.m., prime time, whatever. Play a reasonable amount of money and lineups in GPPs. Like that's where the softest action is. That's where the most upside is. So yeah, I have a lot of going on Sundays for sure. I have a lot of responsibilities. I have a lot of action, but I'm getting better about not, melting down over every little decision, which is really close. Question 5 comes from Jay Webstar. He says, you refer to soft games, 3-mans, 10-mans, or otherwise in your book. I was wondering what makes them soft. Is that based on your knowledge and experience of the field? i.e., the sharp players that you'd prefer to avoid. Yeah, exactly. I mean, a huge part of our responsibility, if we're playing seriously, is to understand game selection. And part of game selection means knowing who is good and who isn't. Because if you're playing higher stakes, it's going to be a lot of the same people in a lot of the same games. So yeah, take the time to go back through your games after they're over, on Monday or whatever, and evaluate opponents' teams, not for results, but for how good the lineups were. Did they play a bunch of guys that you didn't even think were options for XYZ reasons? So yeah, I think that you should get to a point where you quickly look at the entrance in a contest and can immediately know whether it's good action or not. So I take the time to look through games and see if I think the action is good or not. I mean, that's part of our responsibility, I think. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Question 6 comes from Brad Brzezinski. Preferred seat on a plane if you aren't living the hashtag Smiz life and you are in economy. Yeah, just a quick aside on the Smiz life. I mean, for me, I could not fathom a bigger waste of money than first class. I don't really like to drink, and obviously that's like a huge pro. They give you, free alcohol constantly. I don't really like to drink that much. I have short legs, so I don't need the room. that bad, and I don't even think it's that much room, but I don't need the room that bad. I've gotten upgraded to first class a couple times in my life, and I actually found it annoying. I also felt bad that like as the other people are walking on the plane, obviously first class gets on first, and as the other people are getting on the plane, they're looking at me. They're like, "What is this homeless kid doing in first class?" While I drag my peasant ass to the back. I didn't feel right. My go-to move, though, for plane seat selection is the emergency exit row with no chair in front. And a lot of planes have these. Basically, you get room to completely stretch out. And most importantly, you can get up, walk around, you can go to the bathroom without waking some slob up who's sleeping. All you have to do in order to get these seats, sometimes you have to pay a little bit extra. But basically all you have to do once you get on is just lie and say that you'll help if the plane goes down, and you get that emergency exit row. All right, last question we're going to do today. Question 7 comes from Tom Bradshaw. He says, how long should you cohabitate with a female before you can marry? Great question, Tom. Look, this is probably the biggest decision you'll make in your whole life. To me, it would be absolutely insane to not get as much information as humanly possible before making this decision. I mean, if we, consider life a series of decisions, a lot of decisions are small. What should I eat today? Should I take 7th Street or 9th Street today? Should I pet Jerry on her head or her belly right now? With everything, we take the information we have at the time, we make the best decision we can. So if we're talking about something as big as marriage, well, you better believe that I'd want the max info, the absolute max. I mean, my wife and I, we lived together for, God, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years before we got married. Don't remember exactly. And we actually had some background. She was a friend of a friend, and a friend knew her, since high school, since middle school, whatever. I can't even fathom the way it goes down today where you meet some chick on the internet, nothing about her. I'd want to spend, I don't know, a decade or more researching her background, gathering info, maybe 15 years. And that's not to say I'm against marriage. I'm not at all. I actually love it. I'm against making big decisions without gathering as much information as possible. Just seems insane to me. All right. That is going to do it for this solo pod week 4 recap. Get in the listener league for week 5 remains rake free. We'll be back on Thursday with Al and Peter. For Jerry. For producer Luke. I am Adam. Good luck, everybody. We are promoters at DraftKings and also avid fans. Our usernames are Adam Levitan, Al Smizzle, and CSU Ram 88. We may sometimes play on our personal accounts in the games that we offer advice on. Although we have expressed our personal view on the games and strategies in this podcast, they do not necessarily reflect the views of DraftKings, and we also may deploy different players and strategies than what we recommended in this podcast.